Hello everybody, this is my review of Deadhouse Gates. This is a book by Steve Erikson and it's the second book in his series, this epic fantasy series, Malazan, Book of the Fallen. I read the first book in this series, Got on the Moon, a couple of months ago. Very much enjoyed it, however at times found it hard going and got lost and confused about what was going on several times, with people talking about different characters, gods, past events. But I believe that's sort of the point in that first book. You get a lot dropped on you. And the series very quickly gives you a sense that this is sort of a living, breathing world. Because of that, sort of just being dropped into it, that business would be going on regardless of you being there or not. And there isn't really sort of like a farm boy, naive type character that doesn't understand what's going on or it's all new to them. So the author uses that as like an exposition dump or an opportunity to just explain some premise to you and sort of hold your hand through parts of the world building. All the characters in this series appear to be grown-ups, in the sense that they don't need to explain the way the world works, because this is the way the world works. This is how it's always been for them, so there's no need for them to just explain some simple concept like how magic works, because that's how magic works, as it were. So Erikson certainly doesn't hold your hand in this series, which is good but also challenging at the same time. So starting a bit with the world or the universe in this series, the first thing to point out is that it's massive. It's not just set in one country, it's set over many different continents, with different people, cultures, races, histories. There are human characters, non-human characters, and it's sort of in a European medieval setting, but depending on where you are in the world, that does change slightly, but it's sort of in the medieval era, so you've got like a bit like a desert kingdom, which is sort of like Arabian medieval times, where the first book's set in sort of more European medieval times. And this sort of whole series depicts sort of a period of history in the Malazan Empire. As I said earlier, Erikson certainly doesn't hold the reader's hand when telling you this story. He sort of just drops you into this sort of epic world of mages, gods, dragons, demons, empires, a history going back 1,000 years. He just sort of tells his story, and it's your job as the reader to figure out what's going on through the breadcrumbs that he leaves throughout the story and sort of piece things together, which I was able, through what he left, I was able to put things together and understand what was going on by the end of the book, I think. But I was happy by the end. I understood who sort of the main characters were, who the main players were in the story. It was sort of, this is in the first book, so it was Whiskey Jack, his squad of soldiers. Still have no idea how the magic works. I understand that there's warrens, but don't understand what they are. So when I picked up Deadhouse Gates, I was expecting the story to sort of continue from where we left off in Gardens of the Moon, but nope, they're wrong. I thought the first couple of chapters I was like, where's Whiskey Jack, where's Pavan, where's Dujek, where's Edamanda Rake, all the main players in the first book, and the answer is, for the most part, they're nowhere in this book. This book is set on a completely different continent with basically a completely new set of main characters, with some of the side characters from Garden of the Moon sort of coming forward and being sort of more main players in this one. But the storyline in this book is sort of completely unconnected to the story in the first one, which is a particularly ballsy move by the author, I would say, to set something, when you built these characters up for a very large book in the first one, which the Gardens of the Moon is, and then do another very large book with a completely new set of characters. Yeah, very interesting, quite ballsy move, but I think it did work, because basically the characters in the book were very good. So where the first book was set on the continent of Genabacus, this one is set on a different continent, as I said, called Seven Cities. And this book follows several different storylines told from the perspective of 4 characters mainly. We have Fiddler, who was an engineer in Whiskey Jack's company, he's one of the bridge burners. Kalam, who is an assassin, under Whiskey Jack, again one of the bridge burners from the first book. So they're the two characters, sort of side characters from the first book that come forward to be sort of main characters in this book. We also have Felicin, which is the younger sister of Janos Parran, one of the protagonists in the first book. And then we have Daika, who is a historian travelling the Malazan army stationed on 7 cities. And when we arrive in 7 cities and this continent, it's sort of bubbling with sort of rebellion against the Empire, which is referred to throughout the book as the whirlwind, or sometimes as the apocalypse. And the different characters' storyline all circle around this rebellion and how it affects the different sides and the different journeys that they're on. So like I said earlier, with this epic fantasy series, like many other epic fantasy series, there are many different storylines taking place in sort of the same timeline that sort of all come together around the end of the book, and that's the same with this one. So I'll sort of talk about the different storylines that we follow through this. The first one is Daika, the historian, who is a new character in this book, and when the whirlwind, the rebellion, starts in the city of Hisar, I think is how you say it. So the city of Hisar is overrun, and the Malazan 7th Army, who is under the command, or was under the command of a different commander, but now is under the command of a man called Coltane, I think is how you say it. Coltane of the Crow clan and of the Wiccans, from what I understand. And his task, the city sort of is overrun, and then the 7th Army and Coltane, in charge of them, is tasked with escorting the refugees, so about 50,000 refugees, 1,500 miles. They have to move, well, take these refugees 1,500 miles roughly to get them to safety. And while they're doing this, they're being hounded all the way by the army of the rebellion that's just overrun the city. And this sort of particular storyline was my favourite in the novel, because Steve Erikson does an excellent job of making you feel and understand sort of how desperate and difficult this journey is for people to make it. You understand all the way through that the likelihood of everyone making it to safety is sort of between 0 and none, and spoiler alert, not everyone makes it. And the character of Daika for this was a really good choice, I thought, to see the journey through, because Daika is sort of the royal historian, and his job to record the things that go on with the 7th Army and record the events. So he gets to sort of sit in meetings with the high officers and understand their sort of strategies on what they're going to do. But also, he isn't a soldier. He's done some soldiering in his time, but he is an old man and is now very much a civilian. So it gives you sort of a unique perspective as well. You see the sort of soldiering side through the meetings that he sits in, but you also see the sort of physical toll the journey is taking him on, because they're always being hounded, they're always moving at a fast pace. And so for the refugees, sort of, some of them are sort of just being left behind, not through any sort of malice, just because they need to keep going. And if you can't keep up with the pace, well, sort of pirate code, you fall behind, you get left behind, sort of way of looking at it, which is understandable, because if they stop, they all die, as it were. So it's sort of, he's got that unique perspective of being a civilian, understand how it's affecting a civilian, but also being sort of one step removed from the military arm as well, and understanding the tactics that they're using and why. And Coltane, the commander of the army, sort of uses Daika sort of several times as a bit of a sounding board, as well as he's sort of a very learned man, he's very knowledgeable. And sort of this journey is the most epic thing about it. And Coltane, wow, what a character he is, what an epic commander on this journey. There were multiple battles along the way. The 7th Army need to sort of like hold the line while letting the refugees complete like a river crossing, for example, which is one point. And then they need to let the refugees across and then sort of do a tactical retreat across the river themselves. And the ending of the journey where they're getting to where they need to go. It's sort of very heartbreaking, but also awesome at the same time. So this particular storyline was the strongest part of the book, I thought. Like I said, the Wiccans and Coltane were great. For some of the sappers under his command as well, when you read about what they get up to. And throughout the whole book, there's sort of a running joke that the sapper commander, the person in charge of the sappers, never comes to any of the meetings, and they never know who he is throughout this full journey. And they actually eventually do find out. It's rather humorous. It's one of them sort of, they're in a desperate situation, but everyone sort of, it's just so funny, everyone just starts laughing. So it's got that bit of dark humour in there as well, but I thought it was great. But yeah, Coltane for me was the best character in the book, but seen from a different perspective of Diker, which was really good as well. So like I said, this bit of the book particularly was the strongest element in my opinion. So yeah, that was the first character there. Next we have Felicen, who's inside the book. She's a 16-year-old girl who, as I said earlier, is the youngest sister of Perrin from the first book, and she's been sent to work in a slave mine on an island off the coast of Seven Cities, after sort of a culling of the nobility by the Empress, where she's sort of removing potential rival families, as it were. As you could probably sort of guess, being sent to a slave mine as a 16-year-old girl on an island sort of full of thugs and criminals and people of that regard, it doesn't really go particularly well, and she doesn't have a very good time, to say the least of it, about what goes on there. But through the time in the mines, she makes acquaintance with two people, one called Bodan, who's sort of like a thug, with sort of a shady past, and Hiborik, who is an excommunicated high priest of Fëanor, which I believe is a god of war. And with Bodan and Hiborik, Felicen sort of escapes from the mine during a sort of slave mutiny, and we follow their escape throughout the course of the book. But not just them escaping from the mine itself, but it's the sort of, they have to take a journey across a desert to get to freedom, and because of all sort of what's happening, what happened to her in the mine, and before then being taken from nobility and sort of becoming a slave, Felicen is filled, the character is filled with lots of hate and anger at the world, and rightly so, in many reasons, with the things what happened to her, or did happen to her throughout the book, and this sort of drives her throughout the story. And she's sort of desperate for revenge against her sister, who has apparently had a chance to speak up for her and stop her being sent to the mines, but chose not to. So yes, Felicen is sort of a very damaged individual, and since what's happened to her during this book isn't very nice, but she's also a very bitter character and sort of very snarky as well, but you can understand why that is, very much full of venom. Like I said, her journey is sort of not sort of redemption, as it were, but it is very much one of revenge, and revenge drives her throughout the story, and she's sort of after this revenge on her sister, who is a powerful character in the Malazan Empire, and that's what she's looking to escape so she can exact her revenge on the sister. This part of the book, again, strong. I don't think it was as strong as the Chain of Dogs part with the travel with the refugees, but interesting story. This one sort of covers more of sort of the magical sort of elements, really, and the sort of how the whirlwind is going to move forward is more what's covered in this part. But yes, a very enjoyable bit of the book. Finally, we have the story which contains sort of Fiddler and Kalam. whose journey sort of starts together, travelling with Crocus and Absalar, should I say, which is formerly Sorry in the first book, and with the mission of sort of returning Absalar, or Sorry, to her home village, but Calam and Fiddler are sort of using this as a cover for their plan to try and kill the Empress and assassinate the Empress, by using sort of the Seven Cities Rebellion and the Whirlwind as a way for Calam, who is a former Imperial assassin, as his way to work his way to her and kill her, basically. This starts with Calam sort of kicking off the whole rebellion as well, so goes into what they call the Holy Desert of Ruraku, I think is how you say it, and sort of to unleash the Whirlwind, to unleash the rebellion, which starts the ball rolling on most of the main events throughout the book. So this is sort of one of the first things that happens, and also pretty early on, Calam and Fiddler split up, and I thought Calam's journey was entertaining, it was good, how he had to sort of travel to the Empress to try and complete the assassination, and the different sort of journeys he goes on through that was good and interesting. However, I found Fiddler's storyline to be the weakest part of the book, even though I found Fiddler as a character to be one of my favourites, but his storyline I thought was the weakest part of this book, because his is sort of has the most sort of magical and sort of historical elements of the lore elements in it, and this is sort of the difficulty you have when reading Steve Erikson. Well, I found reading the books, because he doesn't really give you that much hand holding, which is good in some parts, because it leads to a lot of sort of mystery and you've got to very much think when you're reading it. You can't just take, I'll just cruise through this chapter. You've got to be thinking all the way when you're reading the book, but at the same time, when he starts talking about lore and magic and history, it is very easy to get lost. I did find myself getting lost in a lot of parts of Fiddler's story. It's like, why are they here? Who's this person again? What's the history around here? And obviously there's all the different races, the Jaghort, there's the Tistarandi, and the Talanai Mass, and I found it hard at times to keep them separate in my mind. So this race is from this period, this race is from here, and because of that, I felt Fiddler's storyline was the weakest in this book, whilst Fiddler was one of my favourite characters, because he is a sort of a bit of a comic relief, sort of normal soldier in the presence of gods, as it were. He's sort of just like I said, he's a sapper, an engineer, and just uses them abilities to try and keep himself alive, while gods and mages and all other sort of demons are all fighting around him. And he's sort of like the normal guy, which is very funny at times, I found. Yeah, but like I said, in this storyline, there's a lot about lore, different warrens, magic, different gods, and like I said, Steve Erikson trusts the reader a lot to work things out. But in this part of the story, I think it may be a bit too much, because like I said, it left me feeling very lost at some point, and I didn't understand the reasons why they were going there and what was the end goal here. So yeah, but like I said, that was the weakest part of the book for me for that reason. So some overall thoughts on the book and the package. Majority of the book I loved. It did take me a bit of time to get into it, as it is so unconnected to the first book. Like I said, you are meeting a whole cast of new characters on the main, so it does take a bit of time to get used to them, because you are, like I was expecting it to sort of just carry on the story from the first book, which from looking into it, I understand that's what the third book does. It actually is essentially the sequel to the first. But to me in general, the story, I thought this is sort of how epic fantasy should be written, in the sense that it is grand on every sense of the word, really. The scale and sort of the ideas and the concepts that go into it. Some of the battle scenes, well, are expertly written, because when I was reading the battle scenes, I sort of understood what was going on in the larger context of the battle, but also you could feel sort of the chaotic nature of the battle as well. I think Steve Erikson's writing, so the way he writes his books, it isn't very flowery, but it's clear. You do know what's going on at all times in terms of, like, in a major battle, I understood, right, this is going on over here, this is going on over here, there's sort of a bit chaotic here. It is very clear in what's going on, even if so you're not quite, like, even though you do get lost at times, it is clear that's more because you don't have the context around what's going on, but what is being written is clear, or what's going on at that particular time. Some of the important characters, spoiler in this book, don't make it, which you can tell is going to have long-reaching consequences in this book. There are some horrible things that go on, which leaves you a bit depressed. But there are also some acts of because of that, there are some sort of acts of great heroism that leaves you sort of punching the air as well. And like I said, the betrayals that leave you feeling down and angry. And there are times where where characters fail because of this. Well, like I said, it makes the triumphs sort of all the greater when they do push through. I can only see this sort of series getting better the more I read, to be honest with you, when I get onto the next book. Because you can see the scale that this book's going to go to, or this series is going to go to, should I say, because we have all the characters from the first book to come back into the story. We have all the new characters now established in this book, and so I've already picked up the next book in the series, and we're looking to dive into that very soon. Well, people looking to pick up this series in general, I would caution people thinking reading this series that there are a lot of things to remember. It isn't sort of a casual read by any means. There are lots of different people, lots of different characters, cities, names, continents, different empires. There's the First Empire, Second Empire, Jaghut, Telanai Mas, Sister Andy, lots of different races. It isn't by any means a casual read. It is something you really do need to concentrate when you're going through. And there are several times in the book I had to go back and go, who's this person again? Flick back a few chapters. Oh yeah, come back to it. So as long as you're aware of that going into it, and you are looking for something that is big on scale, big concept, this is sort of that delivers on sort of epic fantasy in this sort of one of the most epic ways, really. I'm having a blast with it so far. Like I said, lost sometimes, but I think that's part of the journey. So yeah, thanks for anyone who watches. Guy's bedroom talking about books. And yeah, look after yourselves, and see you next time.